You're listening to Meg's story, a daughter with syndromic craniosynostosis, on the Child Life On Call podcast. Hi, and welcome to the Child Life On Call podcast. When your child is sick, the whole world seems to stop in its tracks. Plans and priorities change, and your number one job becomes figuring out how to get your child well again. For some of us, rest, medications, and relaxation can do the trick. But for others, it takes more. It takes countless doctor appointments, invasive medical testing, therapy, surgeries, the list goes on, and then you still may not have all of the answers or results you were hoping for. This podcast features parents of children that have an illness or medical condition and gives them a place to share their own journeys and experiences. We will talk about the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows, but one thing seems to remain the same. Children are resilient and teach us more about ourselves and the world than we could ever imagine. Thank you so much for lending a listening ear and opening up your heart to these families and this podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor.
She was playing with, 3 or 4 girl cousins and a couple of boy cousins, and they're all kind of around the same age. And I looked up and they were all crawling to be at Avery's speed to include her. So that was just something that was just so precious to me and just hit me like, oh my gosh, this is such a gift to have relationships where people will meet you where you are.
Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to share with you my conversation with Meg, who you just got to hear in that little clip, and she has so many good stories to share. So I can't wait to get to our conversation. And she actually recently just published a book, Sky Full of Stars, and my copy is in the mail on the way. And after talking with her, I cannot wait to read it. So I know you'll want to as well. Before we jump straight into our conversation, I just want to remind you all and kind of keep you up to date that Child Life On Call is growing, which is so exciting. We have big plans for parents and child life specialists coming up in 2021. So just make sure that you're following along with us on social media, Instagram and Facebook mostly, so that you can keep up to date with all that we have going on. And one of the really cool projects I really need help from some of the veteran child life specialists that are listeners to this community. So if you've been a child life specialist for a few years and you're not camera shy and you want to be a part of something that is really cool, shoot me an email or a DM and I'm going to have you be a part of our new project. Also, I'd love to hear personal stories from parents or professionals who are sharing the Child Life On Call podcast. I got a message from a mom a couple of weeks ago, and she wrote this email and she said, I found your podcast. I stumbled on it. I'm pregnant with a baby who's going to have a chromosomal abnormality, and we don't know what to entail, but my husband and I listen to the podcast at night after dinner, and it feels like therapy for us. And oh my gosh, hearing that is just incredible. So parents who are sharing and child life specialists who are sharing this with parents, just know that you're doing a lot to spread a lot of goodness in this world. So thank you so much for being a listener. Literally parents from all stages of parenthood, babies that haven't even been born yet and others who have older kids. So it just reminds me to please rate and review this podcast so that other parents can find us, and let's get the word out. Okay, so let's get straight to our guest, Meg.
My name is Meg Apperson, and I'm married to my husband, Cody, and we have 4 kids. This week is actually birthday week for us, so 2 of my children have birthdays. So by next week, I'll have a 12-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And we are a homeschooling family and very busy. My 3rd child, Avery, my 2nd daughter, was born with some very unexpected, quite severe birth defects. So about 5, almost 6 years ago, she was born and really changed the trajectory of our life. And it has been a very challenging and yet very wonderful journey with her. And yeah, that's it. That is why I wrote the book, really was about this journey with Avery and how it impacted our family and our lives and brought up some some things from my past that were kind of triggered by what was going on. And
Absolutely. And your book is called Sky Full of Stars. And when did you start writing the book, or had you always kind of been a journaling person, or how did that come to fruition?
so before Avery was born, I was posting on a small blog, and I was really writing just drivel, honestly, just absolute frivolity. And just really for me, I was posting photos of my children to have all the photos in one place, kind of like a public journal, but I wasn't writing anything serious. And after Avery was born, I was posting more, and mainly because it was a very efficient way of communicating with friends and family. The only people that read my blog at that point were my family. I was not known at all. And so the blog became that, that place where I could send everyone whenever they asked, how Avery was doing. And it really exploded. People started sharing it with their friends. And like within months after Avery's birth, there were like hundreds of thousands of people following along. And when Avery was about 1 and I had been blogging all this time, still really just to keep people updated on Avery and to talk about the things that I was learning and kind of my faith journey through Avery's birth. When Avery was 1, a literary agent reached out to me through my blog and asked if I would consider writing a book. And at that point, of course, I thought I knew everything there was to know about being a special needs family. And I thought I would write a self-help book. And so I started writing this book proposal back in 2016 and got into 2017 and was just like, oh my goodness, who did I think I was that I knew anything, In kind of that initial period when Avery was so little, there was so much adrenaline going on and there were so many surgeries to be had and then she had to recover. And so we were just kind of in constant crisis mode that made me feel like I had a lot of energy. And once she came home and was home long term with a trach and a G tube and a ventilator and a shunt and all these things to sustain her life, really the adrenaline started to wear off. And I realized that I was just really surviving and felt like I had nothing to tell anyone. I had no authority to write any sort of manual. So I scrapped everything that I had been writing and the agent really stuck with me and just kind of encouraged me along the way to say, this is just take your time. I'm here. Let me know what you want to do. So I guess in 2017, I started to build another proposal. And then that took me still about another year or so. And then last summer I had finished the proposal and it was snatched up really quickly by my publisher. And I wrote the book in about 6 months from, I guess, July of last year to December. And then this year has mostly been, the editing process and waiting for the book to come out. So it's very exciting. It's been about a 4-year journey of this coming to fruition, but I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to tell Avery's story. I think it's extraordinary, not because I'm extraordinary or special in any way. Really, the story is just really, really crazy.
Well, that's amazing that you did that. And I know it was a longer period than 6 months, but thinking about homeschooling and Avery and all of her needs and 4 children, that's a lot to have on your plate. And even just speaking with you now, I can tell that you do a really good job of kind of getting your point across and connecting with people, which is why I'm so, so glad that you're here on this podcast. And I'm just wondering if you can kind of take us back to the very beginning when, so she's your 3rd child. So you had 2 kids and you had been pregnant before, and talk to us about finding out that something was different with Avery.
Well, I was about 7 months pregnant when we had an ultrasound done. I had requested the ultrasound because I had a feeling from the beginning of the pregnancy, which started a little tumultuously. I had my appendix removed. It had burst and,
oh my gosh,
they had done blood tests. And at first they couldn't find my appendix at all. So, they're doing all this testing, and a radiologist said, well, I think that she's pregnant. And someone else said no, that's not a baby. It's something else, or there's something wrong with her brain that she's in so much pain, So eventually they figured out that it was my appendix and they removed it. And about 2 weeks later, I started feeling very sick all the time after the surgery. And so I called the surgeon and said, I'm really feeling unwell, all this stuff. So they said, come back to the emergency room and we'll make sure we didn't like leave instruments in your abdomen
Mm.
or something like that. So
That's always comforting.
yeah, exactly. So I went in and I was, talking to the nurse or the doctor or whoever was there at the time. They were like, man, that really sounds like morning sickness. And I said, I would call it morning sickness, except that 2 weeks ago they said there was absolutely no way I could be pregnant. So that would just be crazy, right? So we found out that really it was morning sickness, and I was 6 weeks pregnant, and everything that had gone on had happened during that very early pregnancy time. And no one could
Wow.
explain why they couldn't figure out that I was pregnant. But, just starting a pregnancy off on that foot made me think that, something could be amiss. The surgeon did say, it's very likely that this pregnancy will spontaneously abort. We won't, were you planning this? Like what do you want to
Hmm.
do here? Cause, of course these things could impact the baby. And so, I thought maybe my body would get that memo that things had gone amiss at the beginning, and it didn't. So,
Yeah.
I just carried on, and there was another issue that came up, but it was an issue with me. So they ordered an extra ultrasound, like a third trimester ultrasound, which is not really customary unless something is wrong. So they did an ultrasound, and because they were just looking for something with my placenta, they had a technician who was training do this ultrasound. And so she was very, very new. We'll just say that. So she was measuring Avery's head, and she did her measurement, and I noticed that something was amiss, and I
Mm.
could see that the measurements were very, very small, and that there appeared to be something wrong with her skull. But the technician did not see what I was talking about. She was not bothered by these dates. But, when it's your due date, you,
Right.
you are very, very concerned with the
Yes.
numbers and the dates. And so I said, I think that there's something there. So I asked her to measure it multiple times, and she was just like, oh, a radiologist will see it. And if there's something wrong, he'll find it. But because it was a third trimester ultrasound and it was not an anatomy scan, they were looking for something with the placenta. The radiologist did not see it.
Mm.
He wasn't even looking for it. He said, for skeletal findings, see a previous ultrasound, basically say like, that's not my job. I'm not doing it. So I went to see my midwife afterwards, and she told me that, and I kind of just lost it on her,
Yeah.
like that's not acceptable. I know what I saw, and I know that this is wrong. And I know that I need to see a specialist. So she kind of gave me the speech of, you're probably hormonal, everything will be fine. I'll see about giving you a referral, but it probably won't be approved. So a few weeks later, I was sitting in a specialist office, and they did an ultrasound, and he said, you're right, your baby, there is something very wrong with your baby's head. She has craniosynostosis. And at that time, it seemed like maybe just one suture was fused. And so we were kind of left in this holding period of, these images are just grainy, they're just this black and white grainy photo. And so there's not really that much you can tell from ultrasounds, as far as the skull goes. So we went to see another specialist, and they found that another suture was fused, which put us in a bit of a different category. And, single suture craniosynostosis is just considered simple. So usually not a syndrome attached, but the more sutures are fused, the more likely it is that the case is syndromic. So I felt pretty strongly that we were dealing with a syndromic case, but there was nothing else about Avery's anatomy that seemed amiss. So the doctors just kind of let us do pretty minimal testing before she was born, which was fine. We didn't warrant anything else. And they let me deliver at our local hospital. And so, from 7 months, I think I was 7 months pregnant when we found out that there was something wrong with her skull. And then we just kind of waited. And really, when I had decided to officially share about, Avery's prognosis on the blog, I had been looking for blogs of families who had children with craniosynostosis, and I couldn't really find many. And so I remember thinking, if this is something that happens, I'm going to write about this so that
Mm-hmm.
anybody else who comes along, will be able to Google this term and find this blog and see, just have more answers, because the unknown for me from, 7 months pregnant to when Avery was born was so, so terrifying. I mean, even more than having concrete answers, not having answers really
Right.
was just terrifying. And we knew there were so many things that could go with syndromic craniosynostosis, airway issues, brain issues, all kinds of things.
I'm just kind of thinking about like that mama bear instinct in you that started literally from the very beginning. And, when the midwife says something like you're hormonal and, I find often, parents feel like they're not heard, like they're trying to shout from the rooftops, like something could be happening and they're not always heard. And, it is kind of like you just, healthcare providers don't want parents to freak out either. And they want them to feel
Yeah.
calm. And that really that's not helpful, right? It's more
Yeah.
helpful when healthcare providers listen.
Yeah.
You found out that this was probably syndromic, which, and I can tell you're already becoming an expert at this. You're doing the research, you're finding out the questions to ask and how to advocate. And what was it like after she was born?
So we could tell pretty much immediately after she was born that she was syndromic. Her face was extremely distorted. It's kind of a domino effect with syndromic craniosynostosis, is, those skull plates fuse prematurely, and then everything in the organs surrounding them are affected. So, her eyes and her ears and her nose and her mouth, and in Avery's case also her heart and her kidneys and her brain. And so, we could see immediately that we were dealing with a very, very unique structure, and immediately her airway was an issue. Avery has choanal stenosis, so she cannot move air through her nose. And, babies in that newborn period are obligate obligate nose breathers. So immediately she cried out when she was born, and then she stopped crying and breathing. And so they had to, work on her pretty much immediately. So right away, we kind of had that answer, at least, to say, okay, this is serious. We're not just going to turn around and take this baby home in 2 days. This is going to be, a transport situation. They transported her immediately to the major children's hospital in our area, about an hour and a half from where we live. And, it was very scary in a lot of ways, because we had our answer, but there was really no way to have a good prognosis. There was a lot of testing that needed to be done, a lot of genetic testing that needed to be done that still has never given us an answer after almost 6 years. And
Wow.
so, really, really terrifying, and kind of, you just kind of move forward blindly at first, until you can start to do the research. But yeah, Avery is very, very unique. Her surgeon, we just did another surgery on her in September, and her surgeon said, I'm pretty sure that no one else in the world is like Avery. Like he is a neurosurgeon for, specifically specializing in syndromic craniosynostosis, and our genetic testing would confirm that we cannot find the gene responsible. I think there are like 200 plus craniosynostosis syndromes, and Avery does not test positive for any of them. And so he finally just said, this is, after almost 6 years, this really is like nothing we've ever seen before.
Wow.
So
What does it feel like when a surgeon says something like that to you?
it was really affirming. So initially she had gotten the diagnosis of Cruzon syndrome based on her clinical features. And then, we did some blood tests, and they tested specifically for that Cruzon gene, just a very limited test, and it came back negative. And so they said, okay, no problem. That's a little surprising, but we'll do a sequence. And we had done another test, and everything came back negative. And yet for several years, her surgeons would insist on calling it Cruzon, which makes sense in a way. A lot of her features were pretty textbook Cruzon. And so they would call it that. But that would frustrate me, because it felt like we were settling for that
Right.
answer, even though that's not what we're dealing with. And so I felt like I really wanted to keep looking for whatever it was so that we wouldn't be caught off guard. And so really it took him all that time, he's been her surgeon, to finally say to me, when I would always push back on, yeah, but that's not actually what it is. So I feel like if we just settle, then we're not going to keep going to say maybe there's more, or maybe there are other people. I do believe that there are other people in the world who have Avery syndrome. Maybe they haven't all been classified as having the same syndrome. So it was really a gift to me, back in September, when he was like, this really is so unique. And every time he would do the surgery, we had a little friend who did test positive for Cruzon. She and Avery are about 5 days apart. And so they were on like the same kind of surgery timeline, except Avery would always have these very strange complications to things that this other little girl just didn't have, or, other things that were very severe in Avery, like, brainstem compression, severe brainstem compression. So I would, he would go in and do surgery and come out and say, I've never seen bone thickness like that, or I've never had to do that before. And so I would always say, well, yeah, because you're calling it this and it's not this. And
It's not that.
Yeah, he came out and finally said, it's nothing that we've ever seen. And so I was like, thank you. That was a gift. I needed to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You don't want to settle and just go, it's probably this. It's not, we know it's not, but it might be. So we'll just call it that because it's easier for us. We don't want to stick with that. She deserves more. She deserves more answers. And so you've mentioned that she's had several surgeries and has some complex medical needs. Could you talk about some of the things that you guys have to handle and deal with through the past 6 years?
So right away, Avery got a G-tube just because of, that we really were trying to avoid the trach at all costs, but that obligate nose breather thing makes it really tough for a baby to coordinate, sucking, swallowing, and breathing when they breathe only out of their mouth. So we started with a G-tube, and of course at the time that seemed, insurmountable. Like, how on earth could I ever figure out how to maintain a G-tube? So we did that and then took her home, and she spent a prolonged time in the NICU, and the only thing she had in the NICU was that G-tube. And then we took her home, and she just could not, she was so air hungry all the time that she was miserable. She did not sleep. She only screamed because, if you're screaming, you're breathing. So it was that kind of situation for a little while. And then we called back to the hospital and said, maybe we should consider getting a trach. And they gave us a surgery date of the next morning because they were assuming that she would need it sooner than later. So it was G-tube and then trach, and then she needed a shunt first before we ever did any of her kind of skull reconstructions. And the shunt was a big one. She was really in trouble by the time they put the shunt in. And then we did something called a cranial vault reconstruction, and they kind of took her skull off and tried to put it back on, and then her shunt failed really, really acutely, and she went into a coma. And so when she came out, we don't know if it was that she was maybe always going to need the ventilator, or if it was damage from what happened when the shunt failed. But then she needed a ventilator for 2 years, only when sleeping, because she has severe central apnea. But those were really the things, the kind of the medical apparatus that we were learning how to navigate at first. She still has the trach and the G-tube, and she has those little things like tubes in her ears and that kind of thing. But other than that, on a practical level, she needs a lot of help in therapies. Avery is pretty delayed gross and fine motor skills. So, she's been in physical therapy and speech therapy and occupational therapy and feeding therapy pretty much constantly since she was a newborn. And we've made some progress. Avery is beginning to walk a bit. It's getting better. The surgery we just did in September is hopefully going to help that a lot. We've seen a little bit of improvement, but not quite as much as we were hoping for. So really Avery's care is an all day, every day kind of thing.
Yes.
Just, the every everything you can think of that should be, needs to be done for a child is just, it's just complicated on Avery. And she still eats by G tube. So, there's a lot to manage and keep track of, but she really is a champ. She makes my job very, very easy, as easy as it can be. We'll say that.
Yeah, I wonder, how do you keep track of all of these things? Appointments, like what is your system? What works for you and your family?
I have a calendar. I am like a paper person. So I have like an actual physical calendar,
Yes.
that I look at in the morning and then multiple times throughout the day. It really is like my lifeline. Everything is there in that calendar. I would be lost if it ever became lost. But, yeah, I mean, we have a great support system. So when Avery was really little, my parents or one of my younger siblings would come and be with the older children so I could take Avery to her appointments. But it's very, very complicated. I mean, just having Avery feels like a full-time job, with
Right.
paperwork and advocating and coordinating all these
Insurance and
appointments.
all
Oh
of
my
that.
goodness, all of
Yes.
that. It really is so, so much. I will say that it gets easier. It really does kind of become second nature where I don't have to try as hard to keep everything together. It kind of is more of a rhythm that we have now. And, I wish I could give you like a good formula for that, but it really is just like
No.
keep a really good calendar, keep your paperwork, and, don't put things off as much as you can.
No, I think that's good to hear because it is a system and it doesn't have to be complicated. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like once you get used to it and you get into your rhythm, it doesn't have to be some, you know, 5 binder system and different filing cabinets. It can be a calendar. And if you can make that work for you, I think that's really good. And maybe some other parents can do that too.
Yeah.
And when you wrote to me, you said something that really resonated, and it's that, she's kind of chronically vomited every day, multiple times a day for almost 6 years, and you're always having to stay on your toes. And just recently you've kind of been able to sleep again. And I kind of want to ask you about your self-care. And, that's kind of a new term that people are starting to coin. But over the past 6 years, what are some things you wish you would have implemented to take care of yourself when I know there's very little time to do that?
Oh my goodness. That I wish that question had been on my radar 6 years ago. So
I know.
after Avery was born, I pumped for her. I pumped breast milk for her because she was exclusively tube fed, but she also exclusively got breast milk for 15 months. And it
Wow.
really was, it really was kind of a compulsion. I felt so helpless for her
Sure.
otherwise that it felt like something that I could do for her that I knew was beneficial. So I did that. And so really for the first 15 months, I was caring for my two older children and pumping
Mm.
around the clock about every 2 to 3 hours for Avery. And I really just beat my body up. It was so bad. I mean, by the time I guess 2017 rolled around, when I mentioned earlier that, that I realized that I was
Right.
barely making it, and I didn't really have anything worthwhile as far as advice to give to other people, and kind of switched the book into memoir form. My body just was completely broken down. And I finally went to my doctor to say, I think there's something wrong. I was in my late 20s at the time, to say, I can't walk up a flight of stairs without having to bend over and gasp for air. I
Mm.
don't think this is normal. So they started with some blood tests to find out that I really just wasn't taking care of myself. And the first thing I realized was that my sleep hygiene was very, very poor. I was writing, and a lot of times I would write at night on my phone and
Right.
and stay up late. And so I'd gotten my cortisol curve all thrown off, and my sleep hygiene was just so poor, looking at screens right up until I went to bed. And then, being too wired to fall asleep and then waking up super tired in the morning. And so that was one of the first things to change. I got a Fitbit and it tracks my sleep. And so that was
Yes.
something where I could tangibly see how I was doing, where before I would just be
Right.
guessing, like, well, I got in bed at 10 o'clock and got up at 6. But, if I didn't fall asleep until after 12, then what did it matter that I was in bed for that time? So the
Right.
Fitbit gave me like immediate feedback to say, this is how you're doing and this is how poorly you're doing. So that I could kind of figure out like, hey, maybe I should change the times that I'm writing so that I'm not staring at the blue lights on my screen at 10 o'clock at night. And then assuming that 5 minutes later, I can just fall right to sleep. And then the big thing for me was learning to be gentle with my biology. As I started to just wear down, I couldn't keep up some of the other activities that I'd had. So I would want to work out really hard. And instead of feeling better after I would work out, high intensity interval training, whatever, I would feel sick. I'd feel nauseated. And, whenever I would kind of scale back on that, I would beat myself up about it. Like, oh, you're just being lazy and you really should be working out and, whatever. And, I figured out that in times of really, really high stress, when your body starts to break down, it's trying to tell you something. It's trying to tell you that there's some user error happening. Your
Mm-hmm.
biology very rarely just turns on you. Usually it's trying to help you. And in my case, it was trying to say, you're too stressed to try to go lift weights every morning, 6 days a week. That's not actually helping you. That's doing more damage to you because of this lifestyle that you're forcing on your
Right.
body. So, a big thing for me was just honoring my body in a different way, really taking care of my sleep, changing my lifestyle so that I could sleep as much as I possibly could, and always prioritizing for, a couple of years after that, always prioritizing as much as I could sleep, to say that really is
Right.
what I need. I had such a serious sleep debt that that was really the main focus. And then just being gentle, scaling back to walking or to yoga and eating regular meals. That was something that I definitely let go by the wayside.
Yeah.
So, it took years to figure that out and to figure out the ways in which I was really just trying to shame myself into more activity that was totally unrealistic. And, now I figured out that for me, I still can't do a lot of high intensity training, and I really need more water than I think. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't do well with any screens before bed. I mean, we rarely even watch a movie before we go to bed. Like, I'm not a sit down and watch Netflix person anyway. I just don't do that. But if I
Yeah.
am ever going to watch something, it has to be earlier in the day. And then I realized that being home with 4 children, and when Avery was younger, being home with children and with nurses, because she had some home health nursing when she was a baby. She had for like 16 hours a day, which helped a lot. We don't have that, just because she's doing so well now. But I was so saturated with interaction and yet really, really lonely because nobody really knew how I was doing, but
Right.
so saturated with interaction that I realized that I really have to take time as an introvert to be by myself. So in this season, I'm sleeping a little better. And
Yes.
I can get up early and then just really say, this is time that I just can't talk to anyone. I really just need to not speak. And so, getting up early I've found is a good trade-off for that. I'd rather get up early and be in the quiet than get that extra 30 or 45 minutes of sleep and wake up immediately to children needing their Cheerios poured. So
I
I hope
have
that
to say,
answered
I
your
agree.
question.
I think it does. I think it's the secret to a productive day. Like when my kids
Mm.
wake me up in the morning, I am not okay. If I get up, even if it's 10 minutes before them, for some reason, it's like on my own terms and I get to be the one to wake myself
Yes.
up rather than somebody else. It makes a big difference. And you've talked a lot about siblings. Can you shed with a little light about kind of what their experience with Avery's medical issues have been? And do they ask questions? Do they worry about her? How do you kind of keep them connected? If someone mentions that Avery looks different, how do they handle it?
That is a great question. So, when Avery was born, my son was 6 and my daughter was 15 months old. So my second child, Laura, she has only ever known Avery the way she is. So really, it wasn't until recently that she had any idea that Avery was different from her, other than when they would want to go in the pool and Avery can't go in because she has a trach, that kind of thing.
Right.
And they're homeschooled, so they don't have a lot of interaction with other children, making Avery feel uncomfortable, if that makes sense. I'm from a really big family. I'm number 5 of 8. And so there are like 25 grandchildren in the family. So Avery, and most of my siblings live close to us. So she is just surrounded by cousins who are her age. And so she really is part of a tribe that doesn't make her aware of how different she is, if that makes sense. So, she'll play with the kids, and Avery just expects that all children love and accept her because that is her experience. I can't put her in a class just because of her needs. She doesn't go to school. Even if we go to church, she doesn't go into a class. So most of her interaction with other children is family. And so she doesn't even really know what that would look like in the real world. But when Avery was a few months old, maybe 5 or 6 months old, we found out that actually, because of something that had happened with Avery, we found out that my son needed surgery on his heart. He had coarctation of the aorta. So, they have that bond where, my oldest son, Max, and Avery have had surgery, and, we have to kind of watch both of them very closely. And then my second child, Laura, she really doesn't know life any differently. So,
right.
And then the baby, he doesn't know anything to be different because he just came onto the scene 2 years ago, and he is very interested in all of Avery's medical apparatus. But, there is a little bit of trickiness when it comes to balancing out, equitable time with me, one-on-one time. So we just did the surgery for Avery, and, she had me with her in the hospital the whole time, I think I left the room one time per day because she was so wanting me to stay close by. So, she gets a lot of one-on-one attention. My youngest, who will be 2 in a couple of days, he is still nursing, so he gets a lot of one-on-one attention. So it's really, for me, about learning how to meet my other 2 children where they are, what's going to get me the biggest bang for my buck as far as their personality types and what time of day they really connect the best. And then I just take time out with either of them separately, where it's just me talking to them, getting a pulse on how they're doing. And because they are homeschooled, we just spend a lot of time together, sometimes more than is comfortable for all involved. But, we're just together all the time. I'm so grateful that, I have the ability to homeschool them. It really does feel like a luxury. So I hope that answered the question. There are so many ways I could answer that, just in what is their experience. It's very, very unique, but they, it's normal to them. After so much time has passed, they really, I don't know, they don't ever verbalize that they wish life could be different, or that they're aware that life could have been different, if that makes sense.
It's really amazing, and you're making me think that, I just wish that our world could be like Avery's world, right? Where everybody is just around you and supporting you and loving you. And we do actually have the ability to do that. Surround yourself with people who lift you up, surround yourself on social media, follow people that are like you, follow people that have your similar values, don't fall into the trap of reading all the different troll comments. We have the ability to do that to a certain perspective. And I really think that Avery is just a gift to your other kids in the way that she's going to teach them more about life than any parent or teacher ever could. And I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That's a great perspective. This was a few years ago, but something I was just mentioning, I think yesterday, that really stuck out to me. So we were somewhere for Christmas. My family usually gets a really big house. It's just a huge, huge group. We get a big house for, whatever holiday we're meeting together. And then we all stay there for a few days. And so Avery at this point could not walk. And so she was only crawling, and her cousins are of course all traditionally abled. So they could all walk. But I remember sitting in a room once and looking across the hall, and I get choked up whenever I tell the story. And I was watching, she was playing with, 3 or 4 girl cousins and a couple of boy cousins, and they're all kind of around the same age. And I looked up and they were all crawling to be at Avery's speed to include her. So that was just something that was just so precious to me and just hit me like, oh my gosh, this is such a gift to have relationships where people will meet you where you are. And I think just like you said, to some extent, we have that ability. When Avery was really little, I was on Instagram and I couldn't find anybody who looked like her, and I was really at that point, really in the darkness of like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to walk this out. This all just seems so heavy. And I looked up the hashtag trach baby, and this picture of this little girl who was a heart baby. She had a trach because of her heart condition. And she was just the cutest little thing I've ever seen. And her mom would post these beautiful photos of this baby, and she would have all of her trach stuff happening, all her gauze and all this stuff. And yet she would do her hair really, really well and like dress her in these cute outfits. And it was the first time. And Ava, this little girl, is just beaming in this smile. And it hit me like, oh my gosh, this life can still be beautiful. Like it may be heavy now, but we can get to the point where this feels normal for Avery and this feels normal for us. And so I just started going through the hashtags that would have to do with Avery. Found maybe 5 or 6 other moms who were dealing with, either medically fragile children, severely special needs, parents who had children with trachs, this gamut of medical needs. And really it became this amazing group where people knew the lingo, they could speak this new language that I was having to learn how to speak. And it was so, so important to me. I mean, my priorities with who I followed just completely shifted because, all of the promo codes and all the special deals just didn't matter to me anymore. It just didn't impact my life the same way as finding other people who are kind of headed in the same direction at the same much slower pace. We weren't all going on our fancy vacations and promoting hotels. We weren't doing that. And so it felt like a sisterhood kind of, I still follow those people today, and some of them, their children have been able to be decannulated. So no more trachs, no more ventilators. In other cases, the children have passed away. So it's a really, really special community to me, and one that I hold very dear to me, if that makes sense. Those are the people that really encourage me and speak into my life. And of course, other people do too, but there's something about people who really understand what you're going through that makes them really special.
Absolutely. I love the advice of searching hashtags, and it can be the most random thing, but probably at least one other person has hashtagged that before, so you can go and take a look. And
yes, I started hashtagging for people to find me that way. And I do not know. I mean, probably at least 50 people with children who have some form of craniosynostosis have found me that way, just in searching the hashtags to see. I just feel like it's so nice to be able to show people kind of down the road, when you've walked it for a long time, like these are kind of the bumps and this is what you can kind of expect a little bit. And I think it's kind of a love letter to everybody who follows along later.
Oh, totally. And I have been on your Instagram page and I'm just obsessed with Avery's smile. It literally, you cannot look at this child smile and not just be full of joy. And I'm wondering if you can tell us now post surgery and how is she doing now? What makes her happy? What makes her Avery?
Oh my goodness. So Frozen, anything Disney princess makes Avery
Yeah.
really, really happy right now. When she had this last surgery, which was very, very dangerous, we knew going into it that, we might lose her. We knew because we were operating, on her brain. We were actually, the surgeon removed some of her cerebellar tonsils. And because of how much limited space she has in that back part of her skull, he was operating, just right there at her brainstem. So we knew that what we were doing was just very risky and that life could potentially be completely different when and if she woke up from that surgery. So, very, very scary. She did really, really well, better than anybody anticipated. We have not seen quite as much improvement as we were hoping, but we still have a lot of time to see what she can do. But while she was in there, someone had suggested, while she was in the hospital, like, why don't you make an Avery's wish list? We'd love to send her something, while she's recovering. And so I made this list and people would sell it out completely. And then somebody would
What?
say, I missed it. Could you add some more stuff? And so I added
Oh,
more stuff. These people sold out Avery's wish list for 3 days. And
oh
we
my
came home
gosh.
to our front porch covered with Amazon packages. The mailman thought I was insane.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
this woman went on a crazy shopping spree, but I did not. It was really just that people just love her so much, and she really is so lovable. And so you should have seen that little girl opening up these presents, any type of Elsa, Anna costume, toy,
Wow.
all of the things. And she was just thrilled. I told her she doesn't even need Christmas this year because she got every
Christmas
single
came
thing she
early.
could, yeah, she could ever want. And so she still, of course, says, can I go on your Amazon? I just want to add something to your cart, because she still thinks I'm going to get her more things, but we shall see. She's a character. She's in kindergarten now and really just doing so well. She was reading words this morning, just really blowing me away. We knew that there was some damage. I know that she has some optic nerve damage from one of her shunt malfunctions when she was a baby, but there were lots of things that were kind of, we'd have to wait and see how she does. And so with her little brain, she's just doing so, so well. She is a character. She's hilarious. She's
Hmm.
so sassy. And yet she's really, really sweet. She is somebody who, you don't have to say that something's wrong. She just knows,
Oh.
intuitively. And so she's very protective of her siblings. And just she really thinks that the last baby I had was for her, that was her baby. So,
That's so nice of you, Mom.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, I love
Exactly.
that. Well, if you can, and this is a really hard question, if you can describe what Avery has taught you, kind of,
Hmm.
something you didn't know 6 years ago that you know now, what would it be?
Oh my, that is a very hard question.
It is.
So for me, there was a lot to my faith journey that I needed to learn, and so that was a big, big piece that was kind of the result of getting to know Avery. I will say that um, the the ability to witness this community that I have witnessed over the last 6 years. A lot of times when Avery was inpatient, she would be on a floor in the children's hospital that was specifically pulmonary and oncology. And she was there for pulmonary because she had a trach, so airway issues. But, we were mixed in with the oncology unit. And so that is something that was so deeply impactful for me to see this community and really this community of suffering that had never crossed my mind before. It didn't impact me because I didn't know the people, their IV pole down the hall, and you see them just displaying the kind of courage and resilience that that is just superhuman, and
Totally.
so I guess that was something that I saw the most, or that I learned the most, was like the degree to which people can suffer and yet still be so brave and courageous. And,
Wow.
that was really at the beginning. She was really little when we started, being admitted to that floor. And so that was really something that has stuck with me, where I think, things, I'm so tired and things are going so poorly. And yet, little image pops into my mind of the kind of suffering and pain that people go through. And I just think, they can do it. I can do it. I can do this. And so that's something that that was new to me, that I didn't know before, that has stuck with me for sure, was, I feel so privileged to have been able to witness, some of the things that I've seen. It feels very sacred to be in the ICU, next to families and kind of get to know them a little bit, because you're walking the halls or you're all up at night, standing at the doorways together. And so it's a very sacred and beautiful thing to witness. And then how it impacts the way you walk out your life is really incredible.
Oh yeah, it's life-changing. I feel very similar about that kind of sacred thing that you just touched on about being in my profession. And, I think it's easy to think about suffering and pain as just being these overwhelming feelings. But just like you've described, there are moments where the pain lifts and it comes back and it ebbs and it flows. But there are those moments of pure joy and the ability for a different perspective that you never would have had before. So Thank you for talking about that. I think it will be nice for parents who are listening to this right now to hear that it's not all just pain and suffering. So you've mentioned your book, Sky Full of Stars, but will you talk to us about your blog and where we can find and follow along with you on Instagram?
Yeah, so mostly Instagram. That's kind of where I share our day-to-day, adventures, just what we're doing, how we homeschool, just everyday life stuff. It's not all informational. Sometimes it's just drivel, again, like what I was posting.
Drivel, I love that. I'm going to use that.
Before Avery was born. But that's the place where you can find me most often is on Instagram. And then my blog, which is forfinelives.com. That's updated usually a couple of times a week. And then those are really the only two places. I try to never be on Facebook if I can help it. So so you won't really find me there. So it's Instagram and the blog, and that's where I'm sticking for now.
I love it. And we'll find you in the hashtags too, all those clever hashtags to be able to keep up.
That's right.
Meg, thank you so much for your vulnerability and truth around your story. And we will most certainly be linking to your book, Sky Full of Stars, so everybody can find it, and checking out your blog. So thank you so much for everyone for listening to Meg's story. I'm excited for more families to be able to share. It's just crazy that it's the middle of October. So y'all, we're at episode 48. I know we're going to get past 50 by the end of the year, and that's just such a cool thing. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thanks for sharing, and I'll see you soon.